Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to see another strong turnout from across Canada's agri-food marketing community. I'm Bryce McKenzie, Vice Chair with CAMA. On behalf of CAMA, I'm pleased to welcome you back to the next Agri-Food webinar series. Over the past couple of sessions, we've explored how technology and data are shaping marketing performance. And today we're shifting the lens to something equally important, how farmers actually make decisions. Because at the end of the day, even the best marketing strategies only work if they align with how decisions are really made on the farm. And that's exactly what today's session is about, understanding the role of touch points and how combinations of those touch points influence seed and crop protection purchases heading into 2026. Before we jump into today's session, a quick look at what lies ahead in the series. In April, we'll wrap with Show and Tell Advertising Agency, presenting the other side of the AI revolution, how AI is answering questions about your brand with or without you. As with all sessions in the series, the focus is on practical, real-world insights you can apply directly to your marketing strategies. And before we move in, another quick snapshot of what's happening at CAMA. You can always find a full schedule of events at cama.org. There's a lot happening both nationally and locally. We just launched the CAMA Marketplace on cama.org, and it's a great way for you to connect with the agri-food marketing community. Members can post and promote their services, and their listings are open for anyone to browse and find trusted expertise. It's a great opportunity to increase your visibility or discover the right partner for your next project. In early May, we'll be hosting the CAMA Workshop Roadshow in multiple locations across the country. These workshops will be focused on practical strategy, evolving digital performance, and modern marketing skills. We're also continuing to expand our professional development offerings, and we're very excited to announce that through our partnership with the Canadian Marketing Association, CAMA members now have access to the Chartered Marketer designation that is tailored for the agri-food sector, with preferred member pricing. For more information, check out the CM designation page on our website. If you're not already following us on LinkedIn, it's a great way to stay current with event updates, industry insights, member news, and career opportunities from across the sector. We'd also like to thank our event sponsors, CABIF, Annex Business Media, and Top Crop Manager, and our professional development partner, ThinkShift. Their support makes this series possible and allows CAMA to continue investing in education and community building across Canada's agri-food marketing sector. We'd also like to recognize our national sustaining partners, AdFarm, Bayer, Genumark, McCann, and Real Agriculture. Their continued commitment strengthens CAMA's ability to deliver programming like this throughout the year. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Please submit your questions through the Q&A box. We'll address as many of those questions as we can at the end of the session. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants. And you'll also receive a short follow-up survey, and your feedback will help shape our future programming. And with that, let's turn to today's session. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Christine Waddell from Stratus Research. Christine is a market research manager with nearly 20 years of experience in agronomy, marketing, sales, and grower insights. As a former certified crop advisor, she brings a strong practical understanding of what drives real-world decisions at both the farm and retail level. Her work focuses on turning complex data into clear, actionable guidance that helps ag companies make confident strategic decisions. Today's session, Decoding Farmer Decisions, looks at a critical shift for agri-marketers. Not just which touchpoints matter, but how they work together to influence outcomes. Christine will share research-backed insights on how combinations of touchpoints from agronomists and retailers to digital and peer influence shape purchase decisions in seed and crop protection. We're thrilled to have her join us. Please join me in welcoming Christine Waddell.
Thanks, Bryce. All right. I think I've got that all set up. You can see that all right, Bryce?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. All right, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you, CAMA, for the invitation to participate. So what I'm excited to go through today with you is really about interpreting those farmer decisions. How are they getting there? What is it taking to make those decisions for them in addition to some of the decisions that they're already making on their own? And primarily, we're going to focus in on how these touch point combinations drive seed and CP purchases. So before we get started, I'll just give you a bit of background about myself. I know that Bryce gave me a really nice intro there, so thank you for that. So as he mentioned, my name's Christine Waddell. I'm a market research manager with Stratus. I've been with Stratus for the past 6 years, working in market research. And before that, I had a lot of different experience doing a lot of different things, from working as a territory sales manager, working as an agronomist, which is really where I started. I've got some background in field research and then some background in marketing as well. Spent a couple of years working in different marketing agencies, both in Ontario and in Calgary. And the one thing that's always really driven me is understanding how farmers are making decisions. What opportunities do we have to influence them? And when I look all the way back to when I did my master's degree, what I really learned was that I just love to use data to tell that story at a really practical level. And so that's really the opportunity that I have with Stratus. It's really at the core of the work that I do with clients today. So at Stratus, lead national research programs in both Canada and the US that really dig into farmer behavior and help companies make really clean, confident decisions in their brand strategies. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at how different touch points can shape some of those product choices and how you or your team can use those insights to build stronger, more effective marketing strategies. So before we get into it, Mary has asked me to let you know that I will be sharing slides at the end of this, so don't feel like you have to take too many notes. But I took a chapter out of a marketer's handbook today in presenting, and instead of a typical Stratus slide deck, I've kept it really clean and kind of light on content or light on words. So there will be a couple things. So if there's any questions at the end, by all means, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. So a little bit on Stratus. We are a market research company that is focused entirely on agriculture, and our entire team comes from that agricultural business. So we lead with agriculture, and for some of us, we like to say that we've learned the market research along the way. So our goal is really we want to help farmers and retailers be heard and help the businesses, the manufacturers, seed companies get the real story from these audiences so that they can make better decisions. Stratus has been around for 30 years this year, and we see that the agricultural industry has really relied on our research as the primary source of market intelligence for a lot of their strategic planning. So where are we gonna where does the data that we're gonna see come from? All the insights that I'm going to share with you today come directly from our Focus 360 series that are widely used by crop protection and seed companies. The data that I've pulled from today includes 9 different markets on the brand side, from seed treatments to fungicides in different crops. And on the seed side, we're going to be looking at, or we're going to include data from 3 different crops across East and Western Canada. So starting it all off, I just really want to highlight that we know that farmers are bombarded with information. They're often facing complex decisions about what they need to do, under what kind of time pressure. They're relying on a mix of those personal relationships, the media that they've seen, direct interactions with companies. And companies are investing heavily in different types of communication, whether that be direct face-to-face on farm or the time that they spend at retail trying to train and build confidence. And then on the media side, those media buys and different avenues as which they can reach farmers now. But what I want to talk to you about today is which of these touch points are actually influencing behavior and helping farmers make those decisions. So what we'll go through, as I mentioned, are really those combinations of marketing touch points that will shape farmers' seed and crop protection decisions. So I'll highlight which touch point groups exert the greatest influence, how retail interactions, rep conversations, and different media types work together. As Bryce mentioned, some of the key questions that you'll be able to walk away from this webinar, hopefully feeling like you can answer, are around what impact various touchpoint combinations have on those use decisions. What level of engagement do you have to have with that retailer? What impact does that retail recommendation have on a farmer's decision to use a brand? And are there differences in the level of effectiveness of different media types? So giving you a bit of background about the data, I really wanted to highlight this here because this is very different than each study on its own. And what we're going to be seeing here is the amalgamation of 65,367 different touchpoint interactions with farmers across Canada. We're going to be looking at some of these interactions from 2024 versus 2025 and seeing some interesting shifts and how things have changed. I'm going to show you if there's a different approach to take from seed versus the CP side of the business. And then as well, we'll take a look at how things differ from Western Canada to Eastern Canada. So as I mentioned earlier, each one of these studies encompasses a different, very focused market. So one brand focus 360 study, for instance, we would look at entirely pulse fungicides. And we really dive into each one of these markets with these farmers that contribute and get into how they're thinking, what interactions are they having, what level of impact are those interactions having on their decisions to use each brand. And for each study that was rolled into this overview, we're talking to at least 200 farmers in the East and upwards to 500 farmers in our seed studies. So what we're really going to focus on, as I mentioned, those studies cover a broad range of topics and additional information than what we're going to get into here. But what we're really going to focus on today is really touch points like traditional media, social and digital media, and we've combined those two into one category for the purpose of today's webinar. We're going to look at the impact of direct company contact. So that encompasses things like a rep farm visit or from a seed dealer or other kinds of direct contact that a manufacturer may have with a farmer, like field tours or webinars or trade shows, things like that. Uh, Thinking about what kind of impact that retail discussion has, so that farmer to retail interaction. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, that impact of that retailer recommendation on that decision to use. This will really give us a unique, detailed view of how farmers are experiencing brands and how each of these experiences are translating into use. So the piece that I wanted to start with here, and just to kind of get settled into the mindset of what farmers are interacting with most commonly versus what is having the most impact. So I started off thinking about, okay, well, how many touch points are farmers actually having the opportunity to engage with? And what that really drives out to be is those high scope, high reach contacts. And so that really focuses in around that traditional media and social and digital opportunities to connect with farmers. And so farmers may interact with these fairly regularly. So from a traditional media perspective, this could be anything like a newspaper or magazine ads or articles. We also consider radio, TV, direct mail, billboards. Those are all that traditional media, fall into that traditional media scope. For digital or social, that can be manufacturer or seed company websites, publication or newsletter emails from news resources, or even say something like an email coming from CAMA that may mention a brand or a company that may have some influence over what growers are seeing. This also includes things like podcasts or YouTube, Facebook, blogs, the Combine Forum, all of these kinds of touch points we consider to be a media touch point. So these have the potential to have a lot of reach a lot of farmers can see and engage with these touch points, but they will see that they often have low persuasion. These aren't the touch points that are strongly driving use. And those touch points really are focused on those low reach, high persuasion touch points. So things like direct contact with farmers on the farm or in kind of wider scale projects, like I mentioned, where they're, say, at a trade show, or that retailer engagement. These are activities that have a lot of impact on a farmer's decision to use. However, it is hard to scale them. They are fairly limited, especially from a direct contact perspective. It's hard to get reps on farm in a lot of situations and for a lot of farmers. So really, the biggest challenge I think of and see when I'm thinking about this touch point landscape and how they all interact is the most scalable channels are not always the most persuasive or have the most influence over decisions. And those most persuasive channels are not necessarily the easiest to scale. You can't just simply swap one out for the other in terms of the reach and the level of impact. So I really wanted to start off kind of at the bottom, where we're looking at each of these touch points and the impact that they may have in isolation. So starting off with no touch point. This is looking at how many farmers will use a brand if they've had no interaction with it. It's fairly limited. We're seeing that 2% of farmers ultimately said that they used a brand that they really didn't have a lot of impact with in that season. If we add one touch point, traditional media, that goes up quite a bit, more than doubles, where we're up to that 5%. If we take a look at social, we see another jump. The addition of direct contact, very similar in terms of in isolation, none of these three touch points have a lot of impact. But if we add that retailer discussion, or look at that retailer discussion, we see that we are receiving about a three times jump in terms of impact. If the only thing a farmer gets as a touch point is a retail discussion, around 30% of them will ultimately buy that brand. So in terms of looking at kind of that increased scalability, as I mentioned on the last slide, again, these touch points like traditional, social, digital, or direct contact are important, but for the direct contact, a little bit harder to scale. But really, it's that retail discussion that is going to have a strong basis and foundation. So the one thing, if you are walking away from this at this very moment, I wanted to kind of start to prime the pump. Retail is really that foundation of influence. If your brand isn't showing up in those retail conversations, there's really not a lot else that matters. So now I just wanted to start digging in. Okay, so what happens if we start to layer in some of these touch points together? What does it look like if we're mixing multiple touch points? And just to kind of hammer home my last slide, if we're looking at touch points that work together without the retail, so for the first one here, we're looking at that traditional plus social and digital, and the impact. And we're only seeing that 8% saying ultimately that use the brand if those are the only two touch points they have. It gets a little bit better if we add some direct contact to the mix for either one of those, but still keeps it fairly low. And as we remember previously, almost 30% said that if they have the retail alone, they ultimately use that brand. So comparing that to what we're seeing here, still that retail discussion is really where we're seeing the impact. So if we add that in, so looking at what that impact of the retailer has when we're still only looking at those two touch points. So as I mentioned, we've got that retail discussion alone, 28% of farmers saying that they'll use the brand that they talk about. If we layer in other kinds of media, we see that jump fairly exponentially. So if we layer in the traditional media, for instance, we see a jump of almost 10 points. Moving to ultimately using a brand that they've discussed and also received some traditional media for. If we look at those same metrics for both social and direct contact, very similar kind of outcome if we're layering in social media or digital to that retail conversation. But look at the jump in success that we see if we take that retail discussion and also have an on-farm visit from a rep or have that engagement at a trade show or anything like that. And so if we're all of a sudden looking at, okay, so now two touch points have the potential to impact it so that one out of every two farmers that receives those two touch points ultimately uses the brand. So looking at it from that perspective, we do see that adding those additional touch points to the retail discussion heavily influences brand decisions. And this is consistent that we see across all of the different demographics that we've cut this into as well. So seed versus CP, East versus West, 24 versus 25. So every additional touch point does really amplify that retailer contact. So looking at it again, this is just highlighting each one of these tactics or touch points working in isolation and really the jump that we see as soon as we put that retailer discussion into the mix. For social direct contact, we're seeing about a 4 times multiplier in terms of effectiveness once we layer in that retail discussion. So the next logical question is, what if we add the third touch point? So here we're taking a look at, again, those touch point combinations, and then what happens if we're including that retail discussion. Again, wanted to highlight that what we're seeing if we're only including the media, direct contact, and the impact of that, about 1 in 5 farmers, if they have these 3 touch points, saying that they still used a brand. But again, we start to see that jump fairly substantially as soon as we start layering in that direct contact and that retail discussion. So where if we see a grower that said that they had some sort of media interaction, either on traditional media or that social digital, the addition of direct contact plus the retail discussion, we're up to almost 60% of farmers saying that that closed the deal for them. So this addition of, again, that media, direct contact, and that retailer discussion really is that most effective combination. Adding that fourth touch point. So here is, what does it look like if we then add all? We put everything that we have, and this farmer's seen and engaged with absolutely everything we've thrown at them. Interestingly enough, we don't see any change or improvement if we have a farmer that sees media from both types of avenues, both traditional and social digital. So it's kind of interchangeable. If we're looking at that combination with direct contact, some media, and that retail discussion, like I said, we're really getting at about 60% of the growers that are seeing those media types and having that face-to-face conversation. So really driving home that integration of these touch points is really that clear winner. So even though I have mentioned that that retail discussion is really critical, the retail discussion alone, if we remember, is only 28% win rate there. If you add in some of these other layers, we see that double. And then I wanted to reiterate what happens in isolation. So we don't want to be moving forward with any of these touch points in isolation. Stacking each of these touch points together in addition to that retailer discussion is really that important kind of integration strategy. The next piece I wanted to touch on was we've talked about that discussion. So this is a farmer in the door having a conversation with a retailer or seed dealer, and we see that that's fairly effective on its own. But then what happens if we have a retailer that provides that positive recommendation? And honestly, this is really quite transformational, in my opinion. We see that discussion, we've got it at that 28%. If the only other touch point that grower has is a retail recommendation, we see a pretty substantial jump. And then if we start layering in the other touch points, either media or that direct contact in that retail recommendation, we keep seeing that upward step of interaction. And if we go in with that fully integrated approach, we can get that grower up to almost 2 out of 3 of them using a brand if they've interacted with a retailer, seen some of that media, and had some support from the company on farm. So just wanted to touch base a little bit here on what drives the retail recommendation. And so, like I said, that discussion is good. The recommendation is really that key impact piece. And it's not really just a conversation between grower and retailer. It is a level of commitment. A lot of retailers are willing to recommend different brands, and that recommendation dramatically increases the likeliness and likelihood of a purchase. And what we know from other studies that we've conducted with retailers is that when they are making recommendations to a farmer and kind of what's driving their level of recommendation or willingness to recommend is a lot about confidence. So, do they believe in the brand? Do they believe in the company supporting the brand? Do they feel it's something that's going to perform for their client, for their customers? So there's a lot that goes into that recommendation, and what manufacturers and seed companies can do to help build that willingness to recommend has a lot to do with support at that retail. So whether it's direct contact with that retailer, where some of your reps are working with them, maybe it's local trials, it's staff training, it's tours. So it's really about, again, building that integrated system to help support the retail want to support your brand, but then also using those additional tools on farm to help build confidence in the growers and awareness and familiarity, in particular with those media touch points. So I'll touch base on what needs to, or what we're seeing from those different aspects. So I gave you a bit of a sneak peek, but so looking at some shifts from 24 to 25 when we're taking a look at this data. So we were on the left, you've got that 2024 data, on the right, that 2025. And we did see some significant changes in terms of that percent impact. So farmers that are using the brand, and in particular, it was where direct contact was introduced. So growers that had a retail discussion and some direct contact, and also had some engagement with some media, both traditional and social or digital, we saw some significant increases or improvements from 24 to 25. So unsure what that's going to look like moving into 26, but it was really interesting to see that impact of adding that direct contact had on that decision to use for in 2025. Now shifting from west to east, here as well, we all know that Western Canada and Eastern Canada do have very different approaches to how farmers make decisions, how they're getting their information, but effectively we're still using a lot of the same kind of routes to touch points. So something that jumped out to me as I was reviewing this and wanted to pull out here is that in Western Canada, growers are more likely to have seen traditional media and made some decisions solely based on what they're seeing through traditional media. Significantly fewer in Eastern Canada are willing to do that. In Eastern Canada, we're seeing the strength of their having that retail discussion is equal. So the having that discussion is equal and has the same amount of impact. But once you layer in that recommendation is really where we see the East separate itself from the West. And in the East, that retailer recommendation is far more important, significantly more important than what we're seeing in the West. In particular, when it comes to the touch point combination where we're seeing that retail recommendation and the additional of traditional media, and that recommendation and the addition of direct contact and traditional. So in the East, if we have that kind of full meal deal where they're looking at receiving traditional media, some direct contact, and retailer recommendation, we saw almost 3 out of 4 farmers tell us that they ultimately use that brand. Now looking at differences from crop protection to seed. So this spans all of Canada. So this is equal east and west. But what really jumps out is that need for retailer or seed dealer support, and that recommendation when it comes to seed. So significant jumps for any space where we're seeing either a recommendation and any kind of media use, jumps about 10 to almost 20 points from crop protection to seed. And when it comes to incorporating all of that, so that recommendation, that direct contact, and all media types, we see that again, as I mentioned with the East, it ends up being almost 3 out of 4 growers that have this kind of touch point integration will ultimately use that seed brand. So really interesting to see. And a hypothesis I have on that is the difference in the type of product. Obviously, there's far fewer opportunities and options for seed brands than the number of crop protection products that we're looking at here. Whereas, say, a wheat fungicide project or a cereal fungicide project that we would have looked at may have, say, 15, 16 different types of fungicides in that brand. And then as we amplify that through the different market types or segments, there's just a lot more options for growers in CP. So thinking about it, it does take a little bit more, and because they have a lot more options. So I'm starting to wrap up here. Probably got about 5, 10 more minutes, but I wanted to show everything that I've shown you before now is not a typical way that Stratus would present data. So largely those first kind of 10 slides that I showed you is really all an amalgamation of this. So I just wanted to put that in there because it felt fairly uncomfortable for me today to show a lot of very kind of soft slides, I like to call them. So anyone that's seen me present a Stratus report is probably far more familiar with this type of graphic than what I've been sharing so far. So really, what does this mean for marketers? Both say on the agency side, or if you're working for a crop protection or a seed business, priority number one really needs to start with retail. And I know this is something that I talk a lot about in the work that I do, but really this is where those decisions are happening. You need to help enable retailers in order to sell your brand, help with training and staff interactions. You really need to help build confidence so that they're willing to recommend your brand. And then layering into that, once they're willing to recommend your brand, you see the opportunity for growth there. Layering onto that, we know that direct contact is highly effective. So use that wherever you can. I know that the scope and the ability to scale direct contact is often difficult depending on the size of your sales team or the sales team that you're working with. So I have put this into the category of high impact, but limited scalability. There is going to be a cap to really how much ground you can cover with that direct contact. So I see this as an opportunity to really reinforce and also to support retail, giving them and giving the sales team and that direct contact opportunities kind of legs to stand on. And then lastly, use your media as your primer. It's really the opportunity to build familiarity and prime that conversation with growers and retailers. You have such an opportunity to build awareness and familiarity to drive some of that conversion through retail with the reach that you can get through both traditional and social and digital media. Traditional media is still the biggest touch point that we see in our studies that farmers are telling us that they see. So it is the biggest space where we have an opportunity to reach growers. So then as I'm wrapping up, what I really want you to remember, if you're taking away 3 things here, is number one, your retail is essential and you can't win without them. This is really where you have that space to influence some of those decisions and thinking about it from that marketing perspective, what opportunities do you have to help them build confidence with their customers and in your products and in your business? Make sure that you're easy to do business with, and they'll want to continue to work with and promote your brands and your business. Number two, thinking about media. This is really where we have the opportunity to grow a brand and build demand. And then from there, the retail will convert that sale. And then lastly, the biggest takeaway here is about integration. That integration is really what's going to win at the end of the day. So you need to build that right system and look at what's going to work best for you and your team and your brands, and look at it from a perspective of, okay, so I've got a retail strategy. I need to understand how we can get them on side, what that's going to look like, and how can we build the right system around that to continue to support. What do our reps and other teammates need to be saying to farmers when they have the opportunity to be face to face with them? What do we need our digital presence to look like in order to connect back to that retailer or drive people to ask more questions at the retailer? And same with traditional. What can you do to ensure that farmers are remembering your brands or you're standing out from the pack? Because that system approach is really what's going to win with growers. And as kind of the bonus topic here is that recommendations from the retailer are really that ultimate amplifier. If you can get a grower talking to a retail about your product, that's fantastic. But if you can get that retailer comfortable and confident in advocating for your brand or the company, that's really what's going to elevate you to that next level. And that integrated approach, combining all of these different avenues and touch points, are really what's going to yield the highest adoption rates. Again, with roughly about 2 out of 3 farmers that will ultimately use a brand when all of these channels are used together, especially in the seed business. So that's where I'm going to wrap. I haven't been watching the chat at all here, but if there's any questions or anything else that we want to dig into, I'm happy to. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I will be sharing slides with the audience once we wrap up.
Thanks so much, Christine. That was a great presentation. I think it's always a good news story for us marketers. Sometimes I think we go in a lot of times knowing that, or at least with the hypothesis that, the more that we kind of compound some of our efforts and go with a more integrated approach, that's the right way to go. So it's great to see that there's data out there to actually, back up that approach for us. I do encourage anybody to keep adding any questions to the chat, and we got another 10 minutes or so here to run through those. I will start. There was a question about the data sources. I think you got to, this was 2024, 2025 data. But I guess my question to Bill on that too is that the most recent, or have you been doing this study for a number of years and that's just kind of the most recent cut of the data? I'm just interested if you've seen any trends over the long term, or kind of how far back have you been tracking some of these things?
We've been running both sets of the Focus 360 studies for 15 plus years. It predates my time at Stratus, but I know myself, I've been managing both of these projects in Canada and the US now for the last 6. And we have seen some shifts. And this, with the data I showed you today, is just from 24 and 25. Just to give you the most relevant view, we will be running these studies again in 2026. So we will have more that we can add to this in the fall and the winter. But haven't dug too deep into how things have changed since, say, 2005, 2010. But knowing just that the scale and the scope of how we're reaching farmers has changed. And that's why I always find it so interesting that traditional media is still king, that we still see that print ad or the magazine component is still the number one touch point that reaches farmers.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I think that's another thing that we talk about in agriculture quite a bit is moving to this younger generation of farmers. Like, will those retail face-to-face discussions matter as much with a generation that is a little bit more digital focused? But obviously, we see they are still very important in today's world, and yeah, even some of those traditional channels as well. That was going to lead into one of my questions, and I'll jump back into some of the chat questions as well. And I think you mentioned it there. Like, do you dive a little bit deeper into that data where you see those individual touch points and kind of rankings within those in terms of traditional media or social, kind of which channels specifically within those have a greater impact with growers?
Yeah, so within each of these studies individually, we get into it right down to what the specific touch point is. So we take a look at how much is a print ad driving both consideration of a brand and then ultimately leading to use. How many people that saw a print ad in a magazine or newspaper ultimately use the brand? How many people saw something on Facebook and then ultimately considered or used a brand? So we do really kind of get into the weeds with it a lot with these specific markets. I didn't go that deep, obviously, with this group, just knowing kind of that what we're talking about today, high level. But yes, we have all of that data, kind of really deep into kind of what they're doing. We also run another study that looks at the usefulness of touch points. So it's a farmer telling us how useful they think each of these touch points are when it comes to their business. So, how many of them like to see information from billboards or radio or that rep farm visit or the trade shows, text messages, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. And I have another question here that I'll probably split into two questions. So I'll ask you the first one first, and then I'll move on to the second part. But is there anywhere in the data that you can see kind of which of those touch points are actually driving that retail discussion? Like, which ones get either farmers to go speak to their retailer, or maybe something the retail's seeing that's kind of initiating those discussions?
We don't get into the analysis of what's driving them to the retail. We're really only looking at it kind of that cross analysis with what's driving that consideration. And we know the retail drives a lot of consideration. And then again, looking at conversion to use. So it isn't one where we get into a lot of what they're talking to the retailer about. When we ask them about that topic in particular, what they're talking about, we leave it fairly high level as are they talking to the retailer about performance of a brand, availability, how it works, grower programs, things like that. So we don't necessarily ask them what they went to the retailer to talk about or what drove them there.
Okay. And that was the second half of my question too. If you ever, with either within this studies or any others that Strauss has done, do you have a line of sight into kind of how those discussions are initiated? Like, is it mostly farmers going to their retailer and the ones initiating that discussion, or is it the other way around where the retailer is reaching out to the farmer about a specific brand or product and the farmer's kind of open to whatever they're suggesting?
Well, this might come as a surprise. It depends on who you ask.
Okay.
If you ask a farmer who initiates a conversation at the retail, largely it's the farmer saying that they're starting that conversation. And when we are talking to retails, they say that they are driving that conversation. So it's still a little bit in the abyss.
Okay. 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 Another question here from the chat. With regards to social media, are farmers slash retailers more active on some channels versus others? So I think that goes back to kind of like that touch point ranking question. I know, X, for example, formerly Twitter, was a very popular platform for a long time. Are we starting to see shifts to other social platforms and becoming a bit more predominant in the space?
It's really interesting because we know kind of anecdotally that farmers are very active on social media, but we really don't see that it shows up on our survey as much. And I think it's probably due to how they interpret communication about brands. So where are they feeling that they're being advertised to or they're hearing about brands? My hypothesis is that they are using their socials as a way to engage with other farmers or see conversations kind of among the industry, but don't necessarily feel that that's where they're being served ads or communications about brands. So it is really interesting, but we don't see a lot show up individually about Facebook or X, Instagram. Like we used to ask about all of them. We've added TikTok, like all of these different platforms. And it's really interesting to see that farmers aren't telling us that that's where they're engaging with brands.
Okay. And I think you touched on this a little bit too when you're kind of explaining what's included in traditional and then what's included in social and digital channels. But can you just reiterate for traditional media, is that print, radio? What else falls into that bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. So traditional media is really an aggregate of magazines, newspaper, radio, TV, direct mails from companies, and billboards is what we primarily focus on.
Okay. And I have another question here that's very specific. I think it's from a media planner, so that's why it's getting so specific. Do you ever get into it's so specific, like within print advertising, like certain publications that drive more discussions or have higher impact?
Not in our syndicated work. If we have a client that is looking for something very specific about, okay, so again, we're having this media spend, we're putting X amount of dollars towards this group and this group and this group and this group, we can get into that. But it does end up being so detailed that it is hard sometimes to get that level of detail out of growers when they're completing one of our surveys. So when we're doing our syndicated approach, we're really keeping it high level.
Okay. Another question here about the Quebec market. Do Quebec growers respond in relation, or I guess, are they closely related to those Eastern results that you showed, or is there differences with that province specifically?
I didn't get into analyzing the difference between Quebec and Ontario. We do reach out to Quebec in the same way, but in French, we talk to them in hectares, and so we do tailor the survey so it is more applicable to them. But in the end, we would analyze the results together. So we look at it from a total market perspective, and then within each of the individual reports that they're a part of, we do look at it from Quebec and Ontario separately.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we do see some significant shifts in differences between the two provinces and how they like to be, how they like to receive touch points and how they like to interact.
Right. Okay. There's another question here that actually was one that I had written down as well. So obviously a lot of the data that you presented today was grower focused research and kind of hearing directly from growers. Do you ever do this type of research with retailers and understand from them what channels and touch points and things like that are more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have an entire series of studies that focus entirely on retailers. So one is about channel feedback, where we're collecting feedback from retailers about different manufacturers or about touch points and how they want to be interacted with, and what helps drive their business and willingness to recommend and different pieces like that. And we also run a retailer advocacy catalog as well, a lot in the US, but also we have a couple markets in Canada where we're looking at those retailers and asking them, like, okay, so if Bryce comes to you with a print ad for this product, how useful is that to your business? And so we'll go through very specific interactions like that. And like I said earlier in my presentation, they will get so minute about what they need in order to feel confident in a brand and willing to recommend it.
Okay. Okay. Um, I think we have one. Oh, there's a second part to that question. And I think you mentioned it too when you were going through in terms of kind of those discussions you've had with retails before and that support. I'm assuming it's kind of similar if you look at that, like that in person as well. So it's a manufacturer rep visiting that retail, having discussions in person, probably rank the highest, and kind of those other touch points as well influence that. Is that generally kind of the trend you see in retail audiences as well?
Yeah, and because it's a lot of it, it's so interesting in the egg industry how much that person-to-person contact, that trust in a relationship still continues to go a long way. So it is still foundationally built on the relationships that we have. And the trust has I feel like it's begun to expand past maybe just like the person to person, but it is more into like I trust this company to uh, treat me the way I want to be treated or stand behind their products and things like that. And from a retail perspective, they're frequently telling us that they need a partner who they feel is easy to do business with and can help make them some money.
Yeah.
So it's
It's
everything comes down to performance and profitability.
good. Another question that you may or may not have the answer to, but I assume if somebody used to work with Stratus and if they're focused on a very specific geography and maybe a subsegment of growers that are growing so many acres in a certain area, we can kind of cut that data down even a little bit further and see if there's any kind of variation in some of those touch points and impact in those specific regions. And I guess my question is, have you kind of looked at some of those subsegments and do you ever see big shifts or you throw a dart at anywhere map in Western Canada and you see similar results?
It really depends on the segment you're looking at. Like seed, for instance, there's some pretty dramatic differences from Manitoba and how their behavior is all the way up through, say, the Peace region or Southern Alberta, like different kind of geography specific focuses. They can vary dramatically. There's some markets though where maybe they're a little bit more mature, maybe there's some more options. We don't see as big of an impact, say like something like a pre-seed cereals
Mhm.
or like seed treatments. It really depends on kind of what market you're looking at specifically, and kind of what you're trying to learn. We also, and this is our syndicated work, we also do a lot of proprietary or custom work with clients as well. So we'll often have clients come to us and go, we want to run this study in Alberta only, and we want to understand what Alberta farmers think about X, Y, and Z. And so we have the opportunity. We run all of our surveys through our database. We've got over 16,000 farmers in Canada that have agreed to participate as part of our panels. So we reach out to them wherever they fit. So we can set quotas based on farm size or geography, and really kind of get into whatever topics our clients are looking to get into.
Great. And for some of those touch points, you mentioned this as well at the end of the importance of kind of that, long-term brand building, kind of building that mental availability, whether it be your product or your brand amongst these growers. So when they do go into start thinking about a seed purchase or whatever it is, that your brand's kind of top of mind. Do you ever look into some of those touch points of which are better for kind of more that brand building exercise versus ones that are more about just kind of driving that purchase or getting that quick sale?
Not very often. That one does kind of fall somewhat into that usefulness of touch points that I alluded to with our farmer feedback survey, where we are uh, looking at what they're telling us is useful versus and kind of how that relates to the impact it does have on their final decision on what to use.
Right, right. Another question here, we was mostly Canadian folks, but I know a number of our members work across borders. So I don't know if you've mentioned maybe doing some similar work in the US. So
Yep.
do you have any insights on differences you see in this data or this study, or if you do some similar work in the US? Is there sharp differences, or does the data look similar if you look at the US market?
It kind of depends on what part of the market you're looking at. In seed in the US, I know I work on the corn and soybean seed markets in the US, and along with the brand studies as well. But we see that the seed markets, those retailers or seed dealers, farmer dealers, have more influence with farmers than a traditional retail with, say, a CP market, particularly in herbicides. We see that the fungicide space, typically the retailer has a little bit more influence than what we're seeing in some of those more generic heavy herbicide markets. But it's pretty comparable to what we're seeing in Canada.
Great. And again, you touched on it at the end, but I guess maybe just kind of one final piece of advice. We're kind of through our questions. I guess as we approach, any planning we're still doing for the 2026 year, kind of what are some key things that our members should consider when going into this year's planning based on this research?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest piece to me is I know that media plans and everything have already been set for 26, and are likely already in field with some of these tactics. But I think the biggest thing is making sure everybody's on the same page. So if you've got a retail strategy and you've got a traditional media buy-ins in place and you've got kind of your social media team ready to go, make sure everybody's moving in the same direction. So this is really kind of that system approach that I like to think about it as is if everybody's saying the same thing, if everybody's driving the same message, that's really where it's going to start to stick, both with retailers and with farmers.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. This was incredibly informative. There was a comment in the chat that this has been the best webinar ever. Thank you, Christine. So I
Well,
think
I'll
our
take that. Thank you
members
so
enjoyed it
much.
as well. So thank you. In lieu of a gift, we're going to be making a donation to CABIF in your name. So thank you for taking part in this, and we really appreciate it. Also want to say thank you to CABIF, Annex Business Media, Top Crop Manager for supporting this event today, and our sustaining partners for their continued support. And thank you to everyone who joined online today. And we look forward to seeing our next session as we wrap this series up in April. So have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.